Hey everybody, welcome. Today I'm going to do a roast with me video where I walk you through the whole process of roasting some coffee from end to end. I've not even turned on the machine yet, so you're going to be with me from the start. I have learned from my mistakes from last week where I tried to do this and I overheated, and instead today I'm recording this on my phone, which shouldn't overheat. Touch wood. So first things first, I've come in, I haven't even really set anything up yet, so you'll see it all. I'm going to turn on the roaster. The way I do that is I've got, you can't see it from where you are, but I've got a hose that comes out the back of the roaster and comes to a 47 kilogram LPG cylinder that I've got just outside the roastery. So I turn that on, gas is flowing now. And then on the other side, on the roaster itself, fire this up, turn it on, the electrics. It does take an electrical supply, but counter to what you might think, it's not very much. So this is just a domestic power supply. You don't need three-phase or anything. I think if you get a massive roaster, maybe you do, but this is just a regular domestic supply, and that's just really powering all the controls and the spark that ignites. All of the heat really comes from the burning gas, right? So turned it on. I got to turn on the fans and the drum. It's a safety thing. It won't allow me to light the pilot light unless I've got the drums spinning, the fans blowing. I think that's pretty standard across all roasters. Flip the burner on. This is a lot like lighting a fire or a barbecue. If you've got one, it's not really any different. I've got this gauge on the side here which controls the gas flow, and there's a lever that I just pull up or down, and that controls how much gas is flowing through and therefore the temperature. Because I'm warming up, what I'm going to do is I'm going to set that to maximum. And it's going to start heating the drum. Now, one thing that's really important, this will take probably 30 to 40 minutes to heat up. I know that it's ready, not by the temperature that I have on the side of the roaster here, which is the bean temperature as read by a probe in the drum. I know that it's ready when it's too hot to touch on the outside. Because it will say, if I just leave it on maximum, it's going to say that it's 210, 220 degrees really quickly. But it's not. That's really the temperature coming from the flame that's below the drum here. What I want is some of that radiant heat as well. So I want the drum to be nice and warm. So what's going to happen is over the next 40 minutes, as I see the temperature creeping up in the drum, I will start to back off some of the gas flow and therefore the temperature until I get a bit of an equilibrium where there's not much gas coming in. It's on like maybe 20%. Yet the drum temperature is holding at about 200 degrees. When I get to that point and it's too hot to touch, then I know that we'll be ready to roast. Before I pause that, I'll just talk through a couple of other things that I'm going to do, and that'll save us some time when we're ready to charge the beans. I'm going to plug in my laptop here. I've got a USB cable. This just plugs into a USB socket that's on the roaster. And then I'm going to open up my roast notes. So I just use Microsoft OneNote to capture all the notes. That's my roast profile, signature milestones, if you like, of the roast. So I want to charge at this temperature and drop at this temperature and so on for each of the origins that I'm roasting today. Then I'm also going to open up Artisan. That's an open source piece of software that I covered in another video actually, which I'll link at the end. And that is what gives me all of the variables out of the roaster, including my rate of rise, which is how fast the bean temperature is rising over time. And that's a really important number I'm going to look at throughout the roast, as well as the bean temperature and the exhaust temperature and so on. So that's all on. I can see a live reading on the screen here. I've also got them on the displays down here. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start preparing the coffee that I want to load first. First roast of the day. I always find that to be not as easy, let's say, or slightly more challenging to do. Primarily, it's down to the roaster not being fully warmed through. So even though it's up to temperature, it's too hot to touch, and I've controlled everything I can, it just doesn't get completely warm inside until it's had a full roast. And I think that makes sense because there's lots of bits of metal in that drum, and the contact of the beans that are also hot really just thoroughly heats everything through. So first roast is just a little bit more tricky to manage, and I want to offset that difficulty by choosing a slightly easier coffee to roast. And by easier, I mean one that is probably slightly larger physical size of the bean, so it's a little less jumpy and you get a good reading on the bean temperature and so on, and just one that I find to be stable. For me, that's the Colombian. So I'm going to do Colombian first. This is a 5 kilo roaster. However, the maximum it holds is, well, I don't know actually, 5 kilos technically, but I'd never roast that amount. It wouldn't be very effective heating and so on. I'm going to load in 3.5 kilos of Colombian. Zero out my scales here. I'm using a Brecknell scale. Holds a maximum weight of 6 kilos. So it's the scales that I use to weigh out the coffee at the start and also to weigh the coffee at the end. This little scoop, super useful. Scoop the green beans in here, and then it has this hole at the end here so that you can fill bags with it as well. We use it for both, clean it in between. 2.2 kilos there. I'm going to take some out. So I'm going to do 3.5, actually, you know what? I'm going to do 3.65 kilos today because I want to get an even 3 kilos out. And that's an important thing to talk about briefly. So what I'm doing here, I'm weighing out the coffee. What I need to remember is that the green coffee will weigh more than the roasted coffee. And that's because of the moisture content loss. So I've got 2 kilos here, and I'm going to add another 1.65. Lose a bean, always happens. The reason for that magic number of 3.65, beyond it being just a good sensible load to be putting in this machine to make the most of its capabilities, is that 3.65 minus 15% should be somewhat comfortably over 3 kilos. And since we sell all of our coffee in 250 gram or 1 kilo variants, that means that we'll have a nice round number with a little bit spare for spillage to bag coffee. So I've got 2 kilos here. It's going in the hopper at the top. I'm going to add another 1.65. Very dull to watch. But it is a true roast with me. Oh my God. There we go. A little bit more. Right, we're there. Okie dokie. All the beans are in the hopper now. So that's done. One thing I'm going to do, last thing I'm going to do, is I'm going to check the moisture content of these beans. And that's important because it should be around about 12%, which is what they were the last time I measured them. If it's any more than that, I want to know, because it means it's going to roast slightly differently if the beans are more or less moist than the last time I did it. So this is a sanity check, a quality control measure if you like, more than anything. And to do that, I'm using just like a grain moisture meter. You might have seen these on Clarkson's farm or something like that. They always use it to check the wheat before they cut it. Same thing, just has a setting for green coffee. Turned it on, calibrates to 0. It's really easy to use and highly recommended if you're opening your own roastery. Basically take a scoop of green coffee beans. I fill it up to the top, like so. You can see that, hopefully you can. And then I'm just gonna push down on the lid. He says, maybe a bit more coffee. Try again. You gotta fill it right to the top or it doesn't register. There we go, pretend that didn't happen. Fill it right to the top. There we go. So, this coffee has gone up a little bit. It's 12.3. I'm gonna take another reading, just to be sure. Sometimes you take the beans off the top, and then I'm gonna go a bit further down. Just grab some more here. It's not a problem if it's 12.3, but I just wanna be sure that it really has changed a little bit. Try again. Yeah, 12.2. 12.2. So not a massive change. I'm not going to expect that to really impact the roast. We do try and control humidity in the room as much as possible. You can't see it here, it's just out of sight. We've got a dehumidifier, and all the coffee is stored in a sealed container or a Grain Pro bag, which is, you know, a special food grade plastic bag to keep moisture out. But that should be fine. 12.2, it's a slightly more moist. That means I'm going to expect it to take a little bit longer to dry out. That being said, it's exceedingly warm today outside, a very hot day. So I don't think that it's going to have much of an impact, because with the warmer air, That usually speeds the roast up a little bit anyway. We'll see how we get on. Okay, I will skip ahead on the video a little bit because it's going to be another 30 minutes or so as this warms up, and there's not really much to talk about whilst that happens. So I will see you shortly. Okay, welcome back. We are about ready to go. So what I'm going to do here is get myself set up. So what I'm doing, if you want to see what's going on the screen here in a little bit more detail, go check out my other video where I do a roast with the screen recording on, and I talk through everything that I'm seeing on Artisan. Today I'm going to talk more about the overall process itself. So I've got Artisan up and running, it's plugged into the roaster. What I'm going to do is log my starting points. So in no particular order, I've got up the top here a lever, and what this does is it opens a flap that sits in the middle of this pipe, and this pipe carries the air to and from the roasting drum from outside. If I were to shut the flap up the top here, or the airflow as it's called on my roaster, then the drum would get very, very hot because no air is escaping or coming in. If I were to open it, it would rapidly cool down because lots of air can escape and get in, and so on. I've set it to 3. I leave that pretty static. It's a very aggressive way of adjusting temperature of the roast. But for me today, on this one, I'm going to leave it alone. So that's set to 3. Down the bottom here, I can control a few other things. First, I've got the drum motor. That's how fast the drum is spinning around. For my 3.5 kilos, I've got it set to 80%. So I'm just going to log that here. You might wonder, how do you set the speed of your roaster? I'm not sure if there's an exact science. If there is, I want to hear about it. So leave me a comment and let me know what your thoughts are. For me, I go by experience. And the best way I've got of describing it is I want it to feel like a steady motion, like a wave, where I can see all of the beans rotating around. It kind of sounds like maracas. You probably won't get it with the sound cancellation, but you can hear the beans shaking around. I don't want it going slow enough that the beans spend too long touching the drum and burning where it touches them, searing them. That'd leave little black spots, which we call scorching. I don't want it to go so fast that it barely touches the drum at all, because the drum is one of the primary methods it's going to be heating. So if it was too fast, the beans might not heat up quick enough. Then the drum fan, which is how fast the motor exchanging air with the drum from outside to inside the drum. I've got that set to 65%. And then last but not least, I've got the burner. That is my gas flow. So I let the beans into the drum. We call that charging the beans. I'm going to charge the beans at 220 degrees C on my roaster, and I'm going to get there by setting the burner pretty much to 100%. So I'm going to do that now, and the temperature is going to rapidly start increasing, and that's because the heat generates that much flame at the bottom of the roaster. So right now the roaster was pretty much running off of radiant heat with a little bit of gas at the bottom idling. Artisan is recording everything that's happening. It will know when I drop the beans or charge them automatically because it reads the drop in temperature. So I'm at 211 degrees, 212 degrees, 213 degrees, 214, 15. Lever on the side here controls the chute from the hopper into the drum, 217. When I open it, all the beans are going to drop in, they immediately start roasting. 219, 220. In go the beans, make sure I get every single one, and we're roasting. Now, a debatable thing is, do you charge the beans as the temperature is increasing or as it's decreasing? I prefer to charge the beans as the temperature is on the rise because I need the momentum. So it is a large roast for this roaster, and I found that if I turn the heat off and let the charge temperature drop down to the right level, the drum is already cooling and the beans just accelerate that process. So for me, I boost the temperature up, and as that temperature is rocketing, then I drop the beans in. The first thing that's going to happen is the temperature of the drum is going to plummet. because the beans are room temperature and the drum is very hot. So it will start absorbing that energy. So I don't think you can see it on the screen, but basically the bean temperature is going to show very, very low, and then it will bottom out, and then the bean temperature, which is the temperature of the drum essentially, the beans in the drum, that's going to start going back up again. And that point at which the temperature begins rising again in the drum, we call that the turning point. So that's just about to happen. We're at 1 minute 30 seconds. Boom, there it is. So we're at 84 degrees in the drum as the roast hits the turning point, and now the beans and the drum are both rising in temperature again. This is the drying phase. So the beans go from green to yellow. That's all the moisture escaping them. And you can't really go wrong in this phase. If anything, I want this to be the fastest phase that I can make it, because speed here gives me more time to develop the beans later on in the roast, where it really, really matters. So I'm going to leave it at nearly 100% on the burner. It will take about 5.5 minutes on mine for these 3.5 kilo beans to dry out and go from green to yellow. And then once they do, that will be the Maillard phase, or the development phase. That will last for about 40% of the total roast time. And in that stage, the beans will go from yellow to brown. That's the Maillard reaction. It's the same reaction that you see when you're cooking a delicious steak on a hot skillet or on a barbecue grill. You want a nice even browning. I don't want to see burning, but I want to see caramel sweetness, browning of all those oils and whatever else that make up that tasty sweet flavour that you get. So that development phase is crucial. And so whilst I'm in the development phase, I'm going to be slowing it down a little bit. I don't want that to happen too fast. Hot enough to get the browning and the sweetness, but low enough to fully develop during that time. So as we head it into the development phase, after the beans have dried, I'll be rolling off a little bit of that heat and then extending that development phase for as long as I reasonably can, no more than about 40% of the total roast time. After the beans have developed and they're fully brown, they've gone through the Maillard phase, the bulk of it at least, then they're going to be approaching first crack. First crack is what happens when the beans get so hot and expand that they literally crack, and a little bit of CO2 and vapor inside them is able to escape. And it sounds like popcorn. You hear pop, pop, pop in the roaster, and I listen to that in the little peephole that's here at the top, and you'll see that when we get there. From first crack through to the end of the roast is very, very difficult to manage. I don't want basically any heat in the drum. The beans will roast themselves at that point because it'll be so hot. They'll be like over 197 degrees when they crack. So I roll all the heat off, not so much that the roast stalls and fails, as in it gets too cool in there and it can't complete the roast in time, but not so much that I rush through that phase as well. Right now, we are about just under 5 minutes into the roast, and I'm gonna start checking and seeing when they're dry. I need to know when they're dry because that tells me when the development phase has started. And it's really observing a colour change and a smell. So at the moment it still smells quite grassy, a bit earthy. That's the natural green coffee smell. I find it easier to look away and then come back to it. Otherwise you can't observe if it's actually yellow or not, as silly as that sounds to say. 5.5 minutes. I'd expect them to be dry by now. So let's have a look. Yeah, it's starting to smell a little bit sweeter now. Some of that earthy, grassy smell, straw smell is fading. Yeah, almost. Where are we at? Almost 6 minutes. Yeah, almost there. Almost there. I'm gonna say that's yellow now. So if you see that, yellow, no more green. So I think that's dry. Click on here, I log dry end. First thing I do now I'm in dry end, I'm gonna start backing that heat off. I'm gonna take it down to about 80%. This is the tricky part now. And this is where I think really most of the roast profiling comes into play, because different beans take on heat differently to each other. And so how you control the temperature through to first crack changes quite a lot from bean to bean. So I'm at 80% now. Yeah, I love the smell at this point. I think it's the most, it doesn't really smell like coffee. I think it's a very unique smell, but it's a very, very sweet, a little bit earthy. Wonderful, wonderful. You see that? Very light brown now, very, very light brown. Perfect. So where are we at? I'll check my notes here. We're 7.5 minutes into the roast. We're at 80% gas, and it's been 1 minute, 30 seconds-ish since dry end. So I'm going to give it coming up to 2 minutes into the development phase, and then I'm going to back a little bit more of that heat off. So where are we at? 2 minutes. I'm going to knock it down now to 70%. I can see a little bit of the steam coming out the back now. So we know that that moisture is rolling off of the beans. And I want to keep riding this temperature wave to first crack as long as I can, gently, gently. I don't want to fall off. If I take off too much heat, I'll crash. If I put too much heat on, it'll be finished too early, I'll miss it. Yeah, amazing. Bit of cherry in there maybe, I think. Very fruity, this Colombian. One of my favorite coffees that we sell. Really jammy, sweet flavor. Every time I roast it, I think I smell something new. 3 minutes into the roast. Let's have a look at my notes. Yeah, 4 minutes. I want to be at 60%. My notes say I want to be at 60% gas by around about the 4 minute range. I'm a little bit early. It's 3 minutes 30 since dry. I'm going to back it off now. I think it's roasting a bit too fast for my liking. So just under 60% now, about 65%. While this is going on, I'm going to get my next coffee ready. I'm going to do Brazil next. Got to multitask. This ain't for recreation. This is for work today. So let's put another 3.65 kilos of Brazil in this time for my next roast. It's 2. Keep an eye on this. 4.5 minutes in now. It's 2. No reason I can't have beans in the top, beans in the drum, beans in the cooler. All right, I'm gonna back a little bit more heat off now. So we're at 40%, 11 minutes into the roast. 189 degrees centigrade is the bean temperature, as read in the middle of the drum. First crack's gonna be coming up about 2:04 on my roaster, usually when it happens. There it is. Brazil's ready to go. Right, I'm gonna back a lot more heat off now. So we're just over 25% heat. We're at 195 degrees centigrade, 12 minutes. First crack's probably gonna happen about 13 minutes at this rate. That's all right, happy with that. I want the roast to be somewhere between 16 and 17 minutes long for this one. I like to stretch this Colombian out for a little bit. Now I'm gonna boost up my fan a little bit. The reason I do that is I want to shift a lot of air as the beans start to crack. I don't know if this works for all roasters, but for mine, I've noticed that when I boost the air just before first crack, has a really positive impact on the flavor of the coffee. So I've got the little peephole open here. I'm at 200 degrees, I'm still a few degrees off. I want to make sure I don't hear any popping yet. I shouldn't do, but I'm just sanity checking the readings I'm getting out of the machine. No, we're good. Okay, rate of rise is looking very steady now. That's good. If I see the rate of rise at this point going upwards as first crack appears, that means I didn't back enough temperature off usually. You want to compensate for the temperature increase from first crack that happens when all that gas and moisture expands from the beans. Not have too much heat going. All right, 203, and I'm hearing a pop. 204, first crack. All right, beans are popping. I'm happy with where we're at in the temperature. Oh, it smells so good at this point. So you can see there, very brown now. This is a firm light roast at this point. I could drop the beans here, but 206, very light roast. But I could drop them, and that would be good. But we're gonna go a little bit darker with this, to a nice middle medium. Where are we at? 206. First crack has started. I want this to be about 20% of the total roast time. That's what I'm aiming for. Another couple of minutes. I'm gonna back the air down again now, where it starts to cool the drum too much. So we're at 80%, now we're down to 65%. Very sweet. Starting to get a little bit of that. Wow, I like to think of it as Black Forest Gatto. I know it sounds a bit like a sommelier kind of thing to say, but I like a bit of fruit, bit of chocolate. That's what I'm looking for. Yeah, really nice. Okay, where are we at? 209. Temperature's fine. 15 minutes. 10% of the roast time has been in first crack now. Oh yeah, starts to get a lot of fragrance now. Looking a little bit darker, Not all the way there. I'm gonna take these to about 218 today. Be a little less. Smelling great. Oh, dropped a couple. And you drop them at this point, they're so flipping hot to pick up. A nightmare. Right, where are we at? Back the heat right off now. Just under 20% heat. I don't really want any heat from the flame. This is all from the beans now. 212, 15% of the roast has been in first crack. It's 16 minutes now. These will be out very soon. I think he's going to be out at 215. 215, I think I'm going to say these. They're smelling pretty good at this point. Just want to see a little bit more colour here. Quite dark. I want to see nice, smooth backs on the beans. I want to see really any wrinkles for this one. So it will have expanded to a nice point. Completely dry. About to go. So I'm just going to pop on the mixer and the fan. That's spinning around here. This is where the beans are going to drop out to cool down. That's it. They're coming out. And I'm going to hit drop. Nothing else. All good. You can still hear them popping and cracking. Still a couple going through first cracks. That's good. Turn artisan off. Tell it that the roast is complete. Took 17 minutes, pretty much on the nose. So in total, it was 37% in drying. So about 6 minutes, 20 seconds. 43% in the development phase, developing that Maillard caramel sweetness that we love in coffee. So about 7.5 minutes there. And then lastly, about 3.5 minutes in first crack for 20% of the total roast time. 17 minutes, so it roasts a little bit slower. Remember I said at the top of this video that the first roast can be temperamental. The next roast out here will be faster than that. So that's okay, it's what I expected. The key thing now is going to be to, well, let them cool down just a little bit so I can touch them. And then I'm going to try it. So give that just a few seconds. Whilst that's happening, I'll explain the cool down routine. So I've dropped the beans out. Now there's nothing in there, but I'm not turning the roaster off because I've loaded up the Brazil. I'm ready to go in a minute. I'm just going to put the gas really low at about 15% maybe. And I want it to idle about 200 to 210 degrees. Remember, I dropped the beans in or charged them at 220 degrees. So I want it to sit a little bit under the drop temperature, and that can stay there whilst I'm sorting all this out. So these have cooled down a little bit. They're cool enough to touch. I'm gonna try one. What I do is I chew it on my molars at the back of my mouth. And what I'm looking for, first I wanna get a burst of something. I wanna know that the coffee tastes of something. So I get a little bit of that jam, that fruit. And it's very sweet, almost like on the back of your tongue. Acidity and a sweetness there, a brightness of flavour. That tells me that we're in a good spot, especially if everything else is about right with my metrics that I was expecting to see. So I like that, I'm happy. Now the one thing that I'm going to do, to be sure, is I'm going to weigh them. Remember that I put 3.65 kilos into the roast. Beans aren't finished cooling yet. I'll put them straight back in the cooler. I just want to weigh them. Swap them out. Roast is at 210 now. That's perfect. It can stay there whilst I get ready for the next roast. There's always one. Come on. There we go. Where are we at? 3.107. So put in my little calculator here. 3.65. 3.108. Yeah, 14.8%, 15%. I'm happy with that. So log that there's no defects or contaminants in here that I'm spotting. Do that just for health and safety, if ever there was an issue. Trace back what happened in each roast and if I spotted any issues that I had to resolve, but nothing here. This is a nice clean roast. They'll keep cooling down. Once they cool down, there is absolutely nothing stopping me from getting going on the next roast. So that's what I'm going to do. Hopefully this has been informative and useful. I thought it would help to see a real roast in the process, in the flow, not staged. You've seen it as it's happened. First roast of the day, no less, which is never the perfect one either, so set myself up for failure with that, but I think we did okay. Let me know what you think. What other questions has this given you now? You must have some, so let me know in the comments below. I love seeing it. I love interacting with you guys and hearing what you're doing, what you're thinking about, what you're interested in. If you want to see more, like, comment, subscribe, as you well know at this stage, I'm sure. And I will see you next time. See you later.